Welcome to our podcast series, Coaching Outdoors. I am Anna Marie Watson, and I've got Alex Byrne, my co-host, with us today, and we have got our lovely guest, Treblico. And it would be fab if you could just introduce yourself.
Yep, so my name's Trebilco. I live up in Edinburgh and work as an outdoor coach. I do one-to-one coaching, and I also run wellbeing retreats, so taking people away for sort of residential experiences when we're allowed to, at least, and doing a kind of mix of coaching, walking. Sometimes I business partner with a yoga instructor as well, and just really embracing different elements of the outdoors away on those.
Hi Kat, it's great to see you today, and as Anna Marie said, thank you very much for joining us. It would be really great if you could actually share with our listeners what your earliest memory is of being outdoors and why you enjoy the outdoors so much.
That's a great question. I was looking at when you sent the questions through, what is my earliest memory of being outdoors? I think as a family, my parents were never really kind of big into like mountaineering as such, but we always had sort of caravanning holidays, and the memory that came to mind was going on a sort of overnight camp with my dad. So we'd been staying in a caravan, and the night before he'd taken my brother away camping, and then the next night it was my turn to go and spend some sort of one-on-one time with my dad camping. So sort of all that excitement of packing up the tent and stove, and dad was really into his fried breakfast, so we're kind of cooking eggs on a little stove, and sort of laying out the bacon on the stove to cook it. It was really exciting. And he'd kind of badged it as this big adventure, but actually we only walked about 15 minutes away from the car when he kind of saw this really beautiful spot with a stream running past and this beautiful flat bit of green sort of grass. It almost could have been a lawn, but it wasn't quite. But so yeah, what had been badged as this like big walking adventure, I think actually my dad is more of an armchair walker than anything else. But we just had so much fun, like pitching the tent and as I say, all of the kind of cooking stuff and just playing around in the stream for the afternoon. And I think it instilled in me this just love of being outside, that it didn't always have to be a big adventure. You could just find the adventure in whatever it was that you were doing. And so yeah, that was the memory that kind of came to mind when you asked that question.
And thank you for sharing that. It's always just really insightful just to kind of discover what people's connection to the kind of the outdoors is, and it kind of really goes back into that kind of personal childhood memories, which just shapes so much. And clearly, you know, fast forward, you're now working in the outdoor space as a coach, and it would just be great to get like a little insight into your kind of like what's your journey been along the way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I used to work in banking. So I used to have an office job, 9 to 5. I kind of got into hill walking through the Scouts. So I grew up in Hertfordshire, no mountains down there, but the Scouts in Hertfordshire own a mountaineering base up in Scotland. So I used to come away every Easter and every New Year and do kind of outdoor skills, if you like. And I always said that I didn't want to do my hobby as a career, because I didn't want to ruin it by making it into work, if you like. And then after a period of time working in the bank, I've been finding it quite stressful, as I think many people do in the corporate world. I was also diagnosed with Crohn's disease, so digestive disorder. And I just found being in that stressful environment, particularly I was living down in London in the city, it was probably affected my Crohn's disease quite a lot. And I remember going away for a weekend to Wales just to escape the city. I wasn't really well enough to climb up mountains, which is what I would normally do, but just spending time just walking into this valley, sitting on a rock in the sunshine, looking around at the view. I just felt so much better, like mentally better, physically better. And that started kind of changing my mind a little bit, if you like, that, you know, firstly, how could I get more of this for me? Actually doing it as a job would be a way of doing it all day, every day as well, not just sort of limited to the weekends, but also that it was having such a magical effect on me like, wouldn't it be great to be able to share that with other people? So that kind of planted the seed in my head of actually maybe I should do this as a job. And it took a while. The first step was moving up to Edinburgh from London, just to be closer to the mountains personally, with an idea in the back of my head that maybe one day it would be a career, but initially it was just moving within the bank. The thing that was really the tipping point is I did a coaching qualification. So I studied NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And initially when I signed up to do the course, it was just as personal development. It just looked like something interesting to do. By the time the course came round, actually 6 months later, after I booked it, boy, was I ready for a change by that point. My job had sort of really ramped up on the stress levels, and I just needed a get out clause. So I kind of went into this first module of my NLP course just going, oh, I hate my job and it's really awful. And 4 days later, I had my letter of resignation written and a fairly clear idea what I wanted to do with my business. And I think for me that showed the power of coaching. So although it was a coaching course, to learn how to coach, when you're learning how to coach, you're kind of practicing on each other. You go through your own coaching journey anyway. So yeah, it really kind of showed me how effective and powerful coaching can be, as well as helping me figure out personally what I wanted to do as a job. So it kind of started as an idea of, I want to find some way of being outdoors and helping people. And then suddenly I had this qualification that meant that I had a way of helping people. I already had the kind of mountaineering qualifications. Not that much of what I do is mountaineering. I do some sort of Munro days where we go and climb big mountains and do coaching, but most of it is just bimbling around in nature somewhere pretty. So yeah, the qualifications are probably less important, but that at least gave me the confidence that I knew what I was doing in the outdoors to safely take people out.
I love the way that actually from the offset, it was all about going outside for you. It was actually, I want to be outside. Okay, how can I make this happen? And as opposed to going down the traditional outdoor industry route, it was doing something different, which is, it's a different experience, very different to mine. For me, it was more actually making that transition into the outdoor space, even though I had all the outdoor knowledge. I didn't connect the two, like coaching outdoors. It was like a new thing. Whereas I love the way you've come at it completely differently.
What you said there, Kat, as well, really struck home with me, because I was diagnosed with IBD at the start of this year as well, and I'd been struggling for a number of years, and there's exactly a very similar situation to you, having quite a stressful job, living down in the southeast of England, and wanting the same thing. My husband and I moved to Scotland just almost 2 years ago, coming up to 2 years in December, and for exactly the same reason, wanted to be closer to the mountains, closer to areas where I could walk and talk and get outside and do the sort of outdoor coaching element, but also personally as well, as you said, just getting that sense of healthiness and feeling much better about within yourself and about yourself, which is something that nature can do. And it just adds that one of those benefits of being outside in nature is that ability to be able to sort of, reconnect and rejuvenate yourself as well. Even if as you said, even if it is just sitting outside and enjoying a bit of vitamin D, which I think is, we are in Scotland, and both of us, Kat and I are both in Scotland, and and I have to say, since moving up here, everyone said to me, you're going to be cold all the time, it's going to be wet all the time, you're going to be rained on. One thing, I love walking in the rain, so the fact that it's raining doesn't bother me. But actually, I think we have more sunny days up here. I'm over on the west coast. I know, Kat, you're on the east coast, but I genuinely think we have more sunny days up here than I ever did in the Thames Valley down in the southeast of England. So I actually think, being outdoors and being able to just wander around in the great outdoors does help that sort of health side of things as well. So it's great that you brought that up, and thank you for being candid about that and sharing that with us. One word you used in what you just described as well, which I love, is the word bimbling, which is all about movement. And I love that because one thing we wanted to bring out in these podcasts is the fact that obviously people refer to outdoor coaching in many ways, one of them being walking and talking. And that element of movement it can be a very important part of the outdoor coaching session. But of course, there's so many different ways we can move. Some people stomp through a coaching session depending on how they're feeling. Some people bimble along, which I love your word. They can be sitting, they can be standing. So what do you think movement brings to outdoor coaching that maybe you don't get within indoor coaching?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, it's that feeling of having forward momentum. I think if you're coaching indoors, you're stuck in one place, and often, that's a metaphor for how we feel when we're working through a coaching problem. Often we feel stuck. So I think as soon as you add that element of movement to it, it feels like you're already on your way to a solution. It is quite metaphorical. And yeah, like you say, I notice with my coaching clients, often the speed of the conversation will match the speed of the walking, will match the conversation. So there's some people who are there going, oh, I've got this really tough problem to solve, and I'm going to stride up this hill as I kind of think it through, and I'm there like struggling to keep up with them, amazed that they can talk and walk that quickly. And there's other times where people actually, it's more about being out in the space and having time to think it through, and it is this more kind of like wandering along through nature as they're kind of thinking, but there's still that element of forward momentum to it, which I think is important. There's some research that shows kind of what goes on in our brain when we're moving. The phrase they used was that you're cognitively mobile as well as being physically mobile, because you're moving, your brain's having to take in more information, as you would like back to kind of hunter-gatherer days. You'd be, if you're sat still, then you can kind of see what's around you and it doesn't change. As soon as you're moving, you're constantly having to take in new information. It's like your brain is more alert as well as your body kind of moving. Your brain is being cognitively mobile, and that can kind of help your thinking process.
One thing that's really interesting, Kat, is that I did some research recently for my master's dissertation, and you were kind enough actually to recommend a couple of your coachees who actually took part in my research, which was wonderful. And one thing that came up across the whole research was this element of being side by side within the movement element of outdoor coaching, which isn't necessarily the same as indoor coaching. What do you think the side by side element does for outdoor coaching?
Yeah, I think there's two places people said they have really good conversations. One is outdoors, walking along next to each other. The other one's in the car. And again, it's the same thing where you're not looking at somebody. For me, I think as soon as you're looking at somebody and you've got this eye contact, our brains are programmed to pick up on every single micro movement that your face makes. So even as a coach, your job is to be kind of, non-judgmental and to provide space, but your face will still be going, oh, really? Did she actually say that? Or, even with the best of intentions, your face will still be giving some kind of response. So what that encourages, if people are watching that, even on an unconscious level, they're picking up on all of that. They will start to tailor what they say next based on what they've observed your reaction to be. When you're side by side, you lose some of that. Yes, you're glancing at each other occasionally as you're talking, but it's almost like you're more in your own space to think, and you're not reacting to somebody else's reaction, if you like. You're freer to be more honest, not only with the other person, but more honest with yourself, because you haven't got that kind of reaction that makes you tailor what you say or think next. It's just a kind of freedom of what you truly actually do think. So I think that's a big part of it. I think the other bit is just it feels less pressured. If you're sat staring at somebody, it kind of feels like, oh, I've got to come up with something profound now. And actually, when there's less of that eye contact, I think again it's just that kind of freer, less pressured environment. And particularly with the walking as well, with the movement element of it, you're doing something else. That's okay if you're silent for a while, because it might be that you're trying to concentrate on where your feet are stepping and there's something else to do. Whereas I think when you're sat face to face with somebody, that silence, for a lot of people, they're very uncomfortable with silence. It can just feel quite long and quite pressured that they have to say something. And if they're not quite there yet in their brain processing, actually the silence can be a good thing as well. And I think being side to side sometimes and walking gives that freedom for that kind of silence and thinking space.
And it's almost within kind of the movement as well, like the movement through the landscape, and kind of taking these into consideration. I think some of the work that you do, some of you have like you have the shorter sessions, you have like the longer events as well, and it's almost within that different time frame. Like what patterns do you notice as you kind of move through the landscape? What emerges?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I'll often use the landscape in the coaching that I'm doing. It could be quite kind of metaphorical, and if we're walking up a big hill, it's kind of like, okay, well, you're only going to take it one step at a time. You never need to know what the whole journey of steps looks like to get to the top of the hill. You only need to know what the next 1 or 2 steps are. And actually, when you're working towards a goal or a problem, that's the same. You don't need to know every single step that's going to get you to your goal. You just need to know what the next 1 or 2 steps are. And after that, the next 1 or 2 steps will become clear. And some of the coaching that I do in the outdoors, a lot of it has a journey element. Sometimes we'll end up somewhere completely different. So there's a coaching package that I do that's called the transformational trek, and we'll literally go on an A to B journey. And there's something quite nice about ending up somewhere completely different from where you started. Again, there's a whole metaphor there for coaching. And as you move along the journey, different things come out. And again, you can kind of reflect back, look back at where you've come from, look forward to where you're going. There's also something quite nice about finishing up at the same point, but with everything being different. So again, it kind of doesn't really matter which approach you take. You can pull metaphors into it from all over the place.
What sort of observations and feedback do your clients, your coachees, give you about being outdoors and having their coaching sessions outdoors with you?
They love it. And I mean, that's part of the reason why they pick me. The most common thing people say is, oh, I picked you because you do coaching outdoors. It makes me different, but it's the kind of thing that draws people to me, is that they also have a love of nature. So it's not going to be for everyone. There will be some city people who it would be their worst nightmare to go and get muddy on a walk somewhere and do coaching. And for me, they're not the right clients for me, and they'd never pick me. Most of the people that are drawn to me have some connection with nature, either as a hobby or as a job. I've had sort of farmers come and yeah, they don't normally go hill walking, but they still have that kind of connection with the outdoors. So whether it's walking or whether it's people that enjoy biking or kayaking or wild swimming or something, it doesn't always have to be the same hobby that they do, but they still appreciate the outdoors. And I do get some people who you might describe as a more kind of city-based person, but they still like that kind of freedom of going to somewhere nice. And for them, it is that feeling of escaping where they are, which again can be quite metaphorical. From if they're in a job that they don't like, they actually want to try something different to try and work through it, because what they've been trying so far hasn't worked. But yeah, generally speaking, the people that come to me already know what the benefit of being outdoors is, and so it works really well for them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the other kind of areas that when we were kind of sharing topics of what to talk about, that kind of came up was very much kind of like the whole emotional piece as well. And clearly there's a connection between movement and emotions and how that kind of factors into things as well. But just be kind of curious to notice, what have you kind of noticed when you're working in the outdoor space with the emotions, kind of what happens differently potentially to if you were working indoors?
Yeah, I mean, I always say to people at the start of a session that, coaching can sometimes bring up emotions, whether indoors or outdoors, and that normally it's a good thing, and that any kind of release of emotion normally suggests that something in your thinking or being is kind of shifting and changing. So I'm quite used to having people like sniffling their way all the way through a session, or tears flowing down their face if that's what's right. So yeah, there's kind of that element of it. Because you're got this feeling of being at one with nature, people feel more comfortable in their emotions to let them flow and express. And it's not just sad emotions. Sometimes it can be kind of really happy emotions. If you feel like you've just got to the top of a hill and you've got this amazing view and you've just had this big realization in your coaching as well, there can be all sorts of emotions connected with it. I don't know particularly whether it's different from coaching indoors. I think sometimes that the kind of visual stimulus of the views can add to the emotion. Things like rivers flowing, again, there's all sorts of metaphors in there for tears and that kind of thing as well. I wouldn't say I've specifically noticed, again, I don't really do coaching indoors, so I've maybe not got the comparison for it. But I certainly noticed in the outdoors, the coaching that I do, that people will often experience some kind of emotional reaction, both to the physical location combined with their coaching stuff, if you like, their topic.
And kind of drawing on your kind of NLP background, because this is where for you your kind of journey started. and kind of linking that into your coaching, whether it's the movement, whether it's some of the emotions. How does that kind of specifically fit? Or is it kind of like more of a fluid kind of conversation? It would just be great to get like a little insight, maybe an example or something of how you kind of pull it all together.
Yeah, I mean, NLP is such a broad sort of spectrum of different coaching tools. Some of it is be conversational. Some of it, the way I learned in the classroom. So we've kind of learned, you know, there's certain NLP processes where you sit in this chair for a bit and you talk from this perspective, and then you change perspective and you actually physically go and sit in a different chair and you look back at the other chair and notice what you kind of see. And it was all very kind of like, oh, I'm going to need chairs in the outdoors. And then actually it's just a bit of flexible thinking. Or how could you do that outside? Well, actually you could just say, well, imagine you're walking along next to the person that you would do this coaching process with, and instead of having a chair, they're just walking next to you, and, you know, walk how you would walk with them. So, you know, would you be on a striding walk somewhere? Would you be walking next to each other? Or actually, I had one client who she was working through this process as a relationship with her husband and how that could be improved. And when she did this process, she suddenly just shot off into the distance, and I was like, oh, have I said something wrong, or is this part of the coaching process? But she was just like, well, you asked me to sort of step into my husband's shoes, and if I was in my husband's shoes, he would be a mile ahead of me. And that is was a reflection on their relationship. Again, just practically that's what would happen, but possibly emotionally as well, that was the kind of distance that she felt. So yeah, there's some processes that I have adapted to do on the move. And again, one of the underpinning things of NLP is flexibility in the way that you coach. So it just took a little bit of thinking of, well, how could I change this or tweak it to do it in the outdoors? Sometimes it will just be a very conversational coaching session where it is just like having a chat with a mate, asking you some difficult questions sometimes. And there's times when it is good to do, NLP has some quite deeper sort of coaching processes that tap into your unconscious more. And although you can get some element of that walking along, because it's kind of like a walking meditation where your brain's consciously focusing on what your feet is doing, it enables you to tap into your unconscious thoughts a bit more. Sometimes what really helps people get into that unconscious thinking mode is to close their eyes, and obviously that's not always safe if you're walking along. So sometimes just part way through the walk we'll find a little quiet area, either clearing in a woods or a little beach next to a loch, or just a clearing somewhere, and I will do a more kind of closed eye process there. And then as soon as we're kind of ready to debrief it, I'll just be like, oh, should we keep walking? And then you kind of have a chat about what just happened as you're moving on.
It's really interesting to hear the use of the difference of movement, as you've mentioned a couple of times now, and it's one of the other things that's come up in anecdotal feedback from coachees who've had outdoor coaching is the concept of being able to think differently outside, and the fact that for some reason being in the outside unlocks parts of their brains that they couldn't necessarily access either in their day-to-day life, in their business life, in their indoor life. What is it, do you think, that the outdoors does to enable them coachees to think differently and access different parts of their conscious or unconscious thinking?
Oh, there's so many things it does. I think on a really simple level, again, if you're in a room, you're blocked in by four walls, and it pins in your thinking. You don't have a big perspective, a big view, and it kind of limit your thinking process because you can't see very far. So as soon as you go into the outdoors, it doesn't have to be up a big hill, but anywhere where you can just get a bigger view, you quite literally have a bigger perspective on life, I think. So I think there's that. I think there's an element of when you take people out of an urban environment and back into nature, they connect more with who they really are and what they really want. It takes you away from the kind of job status, the what car are you driving, the what kind of house are you living in. It takes us more back to our kind of core. Actually, all I need is myself, and working out what's important to me and what makes me feel alive is more important than the car, the house, the status, the kind of pressure of society expectations on you. It kind of helps you connect more with who you are and what you really want, rather than what you think you should want. If that makes sense. And then using the landscape as again, I've talked about metaphors quite a bit. I'll often encourage people, if we're up somewhere that has a bit of a view, you can kind of say, well, let's put the problem down in the valley below us, and then actually you can look at it, you can look above it, you can look round it, you can look way beyond it. How does that change your perspective? Often when we have a problem, it's right in front of our face, it's, you know, whacking us over the forehead, and we can't see past it or round it or over it. So being able to use the metaphor of the landscape and, you know, put the problem metaphorically down somewhere where you've got a perspective all around it can help people look at their problem differently.
That sounds like a really great technique, as well, as you said, being able to enable somebody to put their problem somewhere else in the landscape and talk to it or talk about it in a different location to just having it stuck in the brain in a place where they can't access it. And for our listeners, perspective, some of the things that Kat mentioned there's some great research done by the Kaplans a fair few years ago now, called attention restoration theory, or ART. And they believe there's 4 aspects of the nature and natural environments that help us to be restored and to restore our cognitive processes, so that we can think differently and be more creative and problem solve in a more effectively. And one of those 4 elements is, they call it extent, but it's exactly what Kat was just talking about there. It's that space and the expanse of nature and the natural world around us, and being within that, rather than, as you said, Kat, within 4 walls, enables our brain to suddenly think bigger and think beyond the boundaries that we might have sort of set ourselves, either physical or mental boundaries as well. So there's some great reading there. If anybody wants to read a little bit more around that, we'll pop that on our website resource page for those of you who like to read around the research that sits behind these things. One other thing I was just thinking of as you were talking about that, and we've talked about nature so far in terms of the environment and the space, and you mentioned hills and sort of the physical side of things. Does sort of the animal side of nature feature in your coaching sessions at all? How do your coachees interact or connect with the more animalistic side of being outdoors, if at all?
That's a great question. It's not one I've thought about. I think, again, from a metaphorical perspective, there could be ways you can bring it in. So birds are probably the most common nature that we'll see, maybe squirrels if we're walking through, but it's, you know, you can bring that in. If you see an animal, you can kind of bring that into the coaching session. Well, if you were that squirrel, how would they deal with that problem? Or if you were that bird, how would they deal with that problem? You can kind of use, as with any coaching, you're kind of using the things, the interruptions around you to kind of feed into the coaching session. Generally speaking, it's more other people that I see when I'm out walking. In the Pentlands is a venue that I often use. There's not a great deal of, well, not big wildlife anyway. Dogs and things can be quite a distraction for people sometimes as well. Particularly, again, is it a generalization? Most outdoorsy people would also be dogsy people. Maybe that's just my experience of it. But often you'll get dogs running up to you in the middle of a session as well. That can be both a distraction and just a light-hearted break sometimes from, if you're talking about something quite deep. Sometimes having a bit of a laugh and having a little dog come and say hello can be quite good.
And it is like a whole world of like that whole animals, like how do you manage it? I had one client who actually brought their dog with them, just totally unexpectedly. Dog sitters hadn't turned up, and they've been someone I've been working with for quite a while, and it's something that I wouldn't normally encourage, because ultimately you're there for kind of like an in-depth coaching conversation, not for a dog walk. Though on this kind of one occasion it was like, okay, and it was a perfectly well-behaved dog, so it definitely isn't something that I kind of encourage on a regular basis, should we say. So I'm just super conscious of time, and it was we could talk for hours about coaching outdoors. There's so many different avenues, and we've had to kind of cherry pick a couple of areas here, very much looking at kind of the movements and then the kind of the emotions and the sense and thinking differently. So it'd be great if you've got any resources that you'd like to kind of signpost to our listeners. if they want to kind of find out a little bit more about these areas, and then clearly about yourself as well. We would love to know where to find you.
Yeah, so I'll start off just with a book. I've got a book here that I bought recently. I am only halfway through it, but I've really enjoyed it so far. It's called In Praise of Walking. It's by Sean O'Mara, who I think is Australian. I don't know why I think that. He is Australian, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, it's just a really interesting book that talks through kind of some of the scientific research that's been done around what happens in our brains when we go walking. It sort of goes right the way back to kind of caveman days and where we came from as a human being, and actually how unnatural it is for us to be sat all day long at a desk working on a laptop, and how we are built to walk. So it kind of looks at how how walking can be really influential on the way that we think. As I say, I'm only halfway through, but I'm really enjoying it so far. So that's a great book to pick up if you're interested in the science behind how and why we walk and why it's good for us. In terms of me, I'm very happy for people to get in touch with me. My business is called Reach the Peak. So my website is www.reachthepeak.co.uk. And yeah, I love having just random chats with people who are like, oh, I'm thinking of doing some coaching outdoors. Can I have a chat to you about it? I'm very passionate about what I do. I think random connections can be some of the best ones sometimes. You never know where they're going to end up with collaborations or just an interesting chat. It doesn't really matter where it's going, but it can sometimes just stimulate new ideas in your thinking as well. So yeah, very happy for people to email me, kat@reachthepeak.co.uk, or look me up on LinkedIn.
Perfect. And thank you so much for sharing that. And as you say, it is the random connections that just, you never know where they will lead. I mean, I bumped into Alex randomly at Henley Business School, and we've done some amazing collaborations together. And I think I contacted you about a bit of research I was doing back. And, we're really keen to build this community of, coaches and be able to share best practice and ideas. And ultimately, I think we're all on a mission to encourage people to spend more time outside than indoors attached to a computer, which we do far too much these days.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, particularly when you are a coach in the outdoors, there can sometimes be a mindset of, oh, I don't want to help other outdoor coaches because then I'm losing part of my market. But actually, there's so many people that would benefit from outdoor coaching. So many people don't even know it's a thing. Whenever people contact me, they're like, oh, I didn't even know that was possible. It sounds great. So the more people that are out there doing outdoor coaching, the more outdoor coaching will be a thing that people will Google to look for, or will look for somebody near them that's doing it because a friend, down in somewhere else far away from you has done it, and they look for somebody nearby. So I think the more of us that are out there doing it, the better it will be for everyone who's out there doing it.
Kat, that echoes conversations that Anna Marie and I have had numerous times. Even just, what do people call it? There's lots of different, people call it either walking and talking, coaching outdoors, outdoor coaching, eco-coaching. There's so many words for it. But at the end of the day, I think, as you said, the most important thing is to raise awareness about the fact that you can go and have a coaching conversation outdoors rather than indoors. And it doesn't have to be an office-based activity, and that's exactly our kind of aim with this podcast. Anna Marie and I, we want to encourage people to learn more about outdoor coaching and consider taking it as part of their practice as well. So thank you so much, Kat. We really appreciate you joining our podcast, and we will put references on the website for the book that you've just shown us there, In Praise of Walking, and also we will share your contact details on the website too, so that anybody can click directly on there to your website or to your email as well. And our podcast website is coaching-outdoors.com. Hopefully people have found it anyway, to find the podcast in the first place. But thank you so much for your time, Kat. We really appreciate it, and we will no doubt stay in touch as well, and hopefully you'll be a future podcast guest again.
Thank you
very much.